Will the recent floods in Brisbane change the property market? And what is the outlook for these areas that have been underwater? I know that this week's been pretty tough with people having to rebuild, clear out, and the mud army get back to work. So, what's actually going to happen in the property market based on these major events that have been happening, not just in Brisbane, but along the entire east coastline? Now, my name's Luke. I talk all things real estate, renovating, and financial freedom. Welcome back to my channel. So, in this video, we're going to be talking about the floods and how they potentially affect property prices. And if you stick around a little bit longer, I'm going to take you through some flood awareness maps, not just in Brisbane City Council, but show you the other local regional councils across Greater Brisbane and how you can get this information for yourself to work out whether a property is going to be potentially flood affected, whether in recent floods or in the future. Now, there's been plenty of suburbs that have been quite hard hit throughout these floods. We saw footage on the mainstream media of Auchenflower and Milton and inner city locations that had gone underwater, and this also happened on the north side of Brisbane and on the south. No one was safe in that regard, but what is likely to happen in these key suburbs around property prices? I'm sure a lot of you are hoping for a bit of a pullback based on the floods and that activity, but as we saw in 2011, those locations that were heavily flooded actually outperformed the market. 19 of the 20 top suburbs that had flooded in 2011 actually outperformed the wider market in Brisbane. So we're also likely to see that going forward. I think that these floods are going to be a blip on the entire timeline that is the property market. We see floods and fires and natural disasters that can happen to property. But in terms of people wanting to live in key locations, I don't think it's really going to dampen the effect on property prices. It may affect insurance premiums with prices going up. It may affect people's sentiment in the short term around what they want to buy and where they want to buy. But I think over the long term that these suburbs that outperformed after 2011 floods, and now we've seen the floods in 2022, I think people will tend to forget what's happened around these floods and go to areas where they have good lifestyle and living, even if it may be a flood prone area. Now, my personal opinion is to never buy in a flood zone, because as an investor, you're looking for, minimizing your payments to insurers. You don't want to be stressed about the property having water gushing in through the yard and potentially filling up the house and damaging the property. And it can be quite a large expense. I know some investors take the train of thought that you can, if a property is damaged by floodwater, that you can claim it all in insurance and any expenses associated with the repair of that property are tax deductible. This is, of course, not tax advice, but my opinion is avoid it altogether and focus on areas that are on higher ground and are unlikely to have any flood event whatsoever. And then you only have to worry about the roof being watertight, and be aware of flash flooding as well. Now, this caught a lot of people out recently, so even if they weren't in flood affected areas, if the drains weren't clear and the property didn't have the right guttering, the property could potentially have been hit by flash flooding from a lot of rain. So keep all of that in mind. Make sure your property is being well maintained as best you can with your budget, and my personal opinion is avoid these flood areas if possible when making a investment or a personal property purchase. So how do you exactly work out whether a property is going to be potentially affected by floods? Each city council across Brisbane, across Greater Brisbane, is going to have their flood awareness map. They all call it slightly different things, but essentially it's a map that shows you what properties may be affected by floods and what the likelihood of that is. So this is what shows up once you've done a quick Google, and you can launch the interactive flood awareness map from here. Now you have a couple of options here. You can search by address, by lot number, or even by your current location. And so you can just punch in the suburb, the street, and the street number here, and it will take you to your exact location. For today's purposes, we're going to look at the CBD and dive into East Brisbane as an example. As you can see here, we've got Oakland's Parade and we've got some parklands, which is the East's Soccer Club. Now I know East Soccer Club was hurt quite badly in the flood, so the clubhouse and the soccer fields went underwater, and Brisbane's flood map gives you a legend as to the likelihood for the floods occurring. So a high likelihood is a 5% annual chance, medium likelihood is a 1% chance in the moderate blue, and then the lighter blues are less than a low likelihood, so 0.2% annual chance. So these dark blue areas really have a high probability of flooding, and you can see there's a whole bunch of houses here on this road that runs parallel to Oakland's Parade. So when you're doing your property search, maybe you want to click in on a property and you can see here 52 Barker Street might have potential flood issues in East Brisbane. So when you're researching and you're looking at potential investments, or you're looking at an owner-occupied property, maybe it's worth spending the time and a few minutes to jump on and have a look at the flood maps. You can see some areas will be worse affected than others. So in these darker areas, they have a higher likelihood of flooding, but these areas on the lighter blue may have less flooding in those properties, or even only take over half of the property with overland flow path. It doesn't mean that this is going to occur. So 157 Mowbray Terrace might never actually see floodwaters on the property, but this is what the council has taken time to map out to give people an understanding of what could happen if there was a major flood event in these areas. So that's my thoughts on how floods can potentially affect the property market, and how you can go out there and do some research around some flood awareness reports in either Brisbane City Council or any of the councils across Greater Brisbane. Now, in my personal opinion, I don't really like to buy properties that are in flood areas. I don't want to worry about the property potentially flooding every 3, 5, 10 years. I also don't want to have the increased insurance costs, and it's more stress-free for me to buy a property in a better location or on a hill and avoiding these overland flow paths. And I want to be focusing on building my passive income through a consistent asset base. So that's why I choose to avoid flood areas. Now, whatever you decide to do, make sure you drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and click this video over here for more things real estate, renovating, and financial freedom. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.